take the message, take what we're doing, take all the lessons we've learned, and how do we get it out there in a way that all those people that aren't going to step foot in front of inside of a church can have access to it.
This is Equip and Engage, a podcast by Subsplash, exploring how ministry, technology, and innovation come together to equip churches around the world to engage their communities.
Hi, and welcome to today's podcast show. I'm your host today, Carolyn Farney, and today we are kicking off a new conversation around innovation. I'm joined today by our Director of Product here at Subsplash, Steven Testone. Steven, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, Carolyn.
So Steven joins us from Austin, Texas. And a little side note about Steven, he's got a fascinating story, which we'll get into more later, but born and raised Austin, Texas, he is a builder at heart. Some things that you don't know about him: he is a pseudo-professional woodworker. And I say pseudo-professional in that him and his wife, if you go down to Texas, if you've heard of Chip and Joanna Gaines, they are like the Chip and Joanna Gaines of their little area.
Yeah, we're basically them. Yeah.
They could have a whole sideshow spinoff, but no, you, pastoral heart, you got your start just with businesses, moved into pastoring at several churches. You actually had launched a church out of a coffee shop that you built, not from the ground up, but you did all the woodworking inside, which is beautiful. 309 Coffee, shameless plug.
There you go.
If you're down there
Georgetown,
in Texas, come by and visit. But then created this product, SnapPages, which is really what connected you to Subsplash, which was a website builder, to where before we dig into your story, which we will, I'd love to even just kick it off with you giving us your definition of what is innovation. There's so much as we get into it that you've really led the way in this, but would love to even just hear, how would you even define that word as broad as it is?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I have like a perfect definition for it, but it's definitely like a buzzword that gets thrown around a lot. So I think innovation is usually probably think of like creating something new, right? But I don't think it just limits to creating something new. It's really about solving problems. So creating something new or using old methods in a new way to solve, sometimes there are new problems. It's not really going forward and finding something new to do it. It's like finding something that worked well in the past and bringing it into the present. Innovation, I think, is just finding new creative ways or, using things in new creative ways to solve real problems that people have.
I love it. And this, really it's a mindset that we have. And as I've known you, I can see just you're wired in that way and how you think about problems, that things that come very natural to you, that sometimes some of us, we have to step back and can even learn, I guess I could think, if I'm getting stuck here, I could think about this in a new way. So as we start to connect this even to your story, I'd love to hear, I'm sure Steven, as a boy, you were thinking, one day I want to work for a company that does technology and church.
As a young lad.
I even dreamed up this title.
Yes.
But no, how did you get from Steven from business to pastoral to even what led to SnapPages and Subsplash?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell the story. It was started as a cold, dark night in 1982.
As all good stories do.
No, it's not. It's definitely not something I dreamed as a child. I was probably dreaming about, being a giraffe, or I think I actually wanted to be a baker for a long time.
That fits.
Yeah, the interesting thing is, like when you're young, or even like when you're in high school, there's like 10 jobs that exist in the entire world, and like you've got to pick one of those.
Firefighter.
That's right. It's firefighter, policeman,
nurse, doctor.
Are you like science? Okay, you can be a doctor or a chemist, or like I was really into art. It was like, well, do you want to make money or just be an artist? Like you can be an architect if you want to make money, or like you just go off and be an artist and follow your dreams in there. But yeah, speaking of following dreams. So how did I get started? So I got started, really my career path started off in the art world. I was an art director at an ad agency for several years. And from that, got from doing the design part into designing websites. And then that kind of got into like building websites and programming and doing that. did a lot of freelance work, and then I worked for a company that did websites for churches and nonprofits, and did that for a while, and really got to experience, through that company. And then the company that I started after that was a consulting business. We would go off and do websites mainly for small, medium businesses. But it was amazing that you could see the real problem that everybody was having. Like, especially at the time, you could not get a website unless you hired someone to do it. And that was thousands and thousands of dollars. Yeah. And depending on who you were, or what kind of business it was, for churches, I'd sometimes go and talk to smaller churches, and that was like a big investment for them to get.
Thousands of dollars to be able to embark on that.
Both churches and small businesses would end up with the same problem. The problem is like many things in life, you pay for what you get.
Yeah.
And, it'd be like, oh, well, we had this volunteer that did it, and he kind of was doing this, and now he's gone, and now the
we
website
have no idea how to change anything on this.
Right. So now, it's been saying this event for like the last 3 years, and,
we don't even have this pastor anymore.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And even on this, it was, so on the small, in medium businesses, there was even situations where it was like a hostage situations where like I created your website and now they're charging us an arm and a leg to do every single update and that kind of stuff. So I just kept hearing that story over and over and over again. And just really seeing where software was going at a time was like, okay, there's got to be a better way. I go in and I do the same thing, 90% of the same thing for all these different customers. Like, so I would slowly streamline the process and create templates to make my job easier and make it faster for them. And then from that, just kind of evolved into like the website building space. It was like, okay, it actually came from, Apple had in their iPhoto like a scrapbook building tool, and my wife at the time, scrapbooking. I don't know if you remember, but like scrapbooking was a thing for a little while.
I invested heavily in the scrapbooking industry.
Yeah, there was like scrapbooking parties,
creative memories,
and yes, there you go. That's right. And it'd come home with like these grand plans of like, I'm going to take 20 years of photos and I'm going to make like beautiful books with them.
Yes.
And I sat down one time and like, she was so frustrated. Like it's harder than it looks, like, just to do all that kind of stuff. And finally I kind of sat her in front of, this photo software that Apple had and showed like, you can make a photo book and like how quick and like, it was so great. She's like, I can do this. And it was like, okay, if you can do that with photos, like we can do this with websites. And so started SnapPages back then, probably was about like 2006 and really, website builders were not really a thing at that point. Everybody was, if you look back at, everybody was kind of getting their start around that. So it's an interesting thing with product, like, you kind of talk about like, well, what are you supposed to build, or like, what should you build for customers, or how does that work? But it's not always looking for the thing that people are asking for, because no one was asking for a website builder at the time. They were just asking for, I need a website and I need this, so...
Yeah, and you've always been great at that in terms of what are the questions that they're not asking? What is it that they're wanting to where it's not just, how do we get underneath what these problems are that they have?
Yeah, and it's just like almost everything with people. It's like, you see something that they're saying, but like quite often there's a problem behind the problem that they're saying, or there's a pain behind the thing that they're outward really reacting to. And so, the problem is that I need to have this website updated, and I don't have a lot of money, and but now it is, you have to have a website. So anyways, went and built, kind of some early versions of SnapPages, tried it out, and people were like, really loved it. And that's one of the things that I've kind of gone back and I've looked back at my entire life and tried to figure out like, what are the common threads of things that I enjoy doing? And it really is like, I love taking complicated things and making them simple.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even the proof in the pudding, early on SnapPages, you take it, launch it at South by Southwest, get a lot of attention from it, and even get written up by TechCrunch, one of the leading, blogging spheres for even where people go to get recommendations for technology. And I believe the title went something of the effect of Apple should either envy this or buy it or replicate it. Yeah. And I mean, what?
I still got that one in a frame in my office somewhere. Like, that article,
it's phenomenal. And I think, even as we start to tie these pieces together as well, and being on the Subsplash end, I know kind of how those worlds started to converge. I mean, really just the pastoral heart was there for you because, here you have this website building product that's starting to get on par. Obviously, there's names that we recognize in the industry of Squarespace and Wix and others that are out there. Here, SnapPages is positioned in a very innovative way, and you're getting some big time offers for this. But how is it that you then kind of take the turn in, and end up at Subsplash?
Right. Yeah. So with SnapPages, it's obviously something like I love building software. I love solving problems. I love doing all those things. But like it's honestly not my number one passion. It is really and something that kind of grew in me more and more was sharing God's word, teaching about it, all those things. And it was a honestly a confusing thing for me in a long time because I was like, God, okay, you've gifted me in this business world, but then like you're also like continually moving my heart this way, and I'm getting a lot of like pushback of like, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you? And so it was like this back and forth of like, which one am I supposed to be? Am I supposed to be a pastor? Am I supposed to be an entrepreneur? And I always kind of did like this as an A or as a B kind of a situation. And my wife, like, I remember distinctly one time we were kind of sitting down and having one of those talks that you have like on vacation where you have like all these great talks, and she's like, well, why do you have to be one or the other? Like, why can't you be both? And so like, okay, well, maybe I can be a pastor and an entrepreneur, and those two can live together. And like, I don't know how that all works out, but it kind of started us on this journey of really like the church plant that we just did about 2 years ago. We've had always had a heart for all the people that are not coming to church anymore. Like our generation, the generation below us, like the statistics and everything, they're just not going to church anymore. So how are we going to reach them? And that's where the coffee shop kind of came from. It's like the one place, in our society where people sit and talk and, continue to do those things. And so we went and we started to do that. And all the meanwhile, I'm still running SnapPages, but like, I tend to sometimes take on more than I should at any given time, but whatever, life's short, go for it. But it definitely got to a point where it was like, okay, God, I know you're calling us to do this church, but if you're also calling me to steward this, like something has to come in, something has to change, something has to help. And that's really when I stumbled upon Subsplash and just, was looking at some of the web embeds, the media players and things like that. And I'd always been looking for a great sermon media player web solution and just had never found it. And then so when I saw it, it kind of gave me a road of like, oh, I'm going to go check out this company. And then when I checked out the company, I was like, oh, they've got all these things, but they don't have websites. So maybe I should just, I don't know, see if there's something there. We should reach out and maybe be able to work together. And that just kind of started on the journey. And it was awesome, that Subsplash, and we just kind of ended teaming up together and joining together on it. And it was great because it brought everything full circle. I had started out in the website building world. Really, it was like, okay, how can I help churches and do this for less money? I'm going to take it and put on the small businesses. If we can get enough of them, then we can give it away for a smaller amount. And to be able to come back full circle and now work for a company that helps me like combine my two passions together, that was never really even an option for me. I really thought, oh, I'll sell this one day and then I'll go do ministry and then I'll go do something else.
Right. And so I love the threads there that, even how the Lord has worked here, even just in our company, of kind of bringing these different stories in line with each other. And as we start even thinking about, you have such a unique perspective of some practical pastoral as well as very tangible innovation and for the technology space that we're in. Where theologically, if we were to even gear there, where does innovation fit in the church? Yeah, no, it's a good question because it's weird. It's one of these things where it's like you're either really for it or you're kind of scared of it, and like where does it fit? And I think it's like with many things when you have like two ends of the spectrum, like the answer's somewhere in the middle, right? Sure. And so, I do believe innovation is about
solving problems. It's about looking at the world and thinking like, how can this be better? How can we go in and do something better? And especially when it comes to, a mission as critical, like people innovate for all sorts of things. Like, I want to, you look at Dyson and like what they're doing with vacuum cleaners. And like, I love the fact that like you guys are still innovating vacuum cleaners. Exactly. That's fantastic. Like, but when it comes to something as big as, okay, we're trying to get the gospel out. We're trying to go out and proclaim that Jesus is Lord. Like, absolutely, we should always be asking the question, like, how can we do that better? And not just for the sake of, I think the problem that we get into in the church space with innovation is when we start innovating for the sake of innovating. We think that innovation in itself is a virtue, and like, oh, if I'm not innovating, then I'm not doing the right thing. But like, then you get into, I think you can go down a path of just trying new stuff just to look like you're.
I love that. And it seems like speaking to just what your motivation behind innovating is in that. So in that, what would you see as areas that are ripe for innovation? So, what are those things that we should be thinking about innovating?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of areas. I think one, just even kind of going back to, my story, I do think we as a church collectively are going to have to think of, how do we do things differently? How do we do things differently that maybe everything was happening inside our four walls before? And how do we start to move out that? How do we start to reach out to people in such a way to do that and do that in a way, though, without sacrificing the things that we should be doing as a church. And the way I always think about it is like the Apostle Paul talked about, like, I'm doing everything I can to remove as many barriers as I can to reach as many people as I can, right? But in the same breath, talks about like the gospel itself is a stumbling block. So like there are things that are like necessary barriers and necessary hurdles, and we need to like carefully look at those and realize like those aren't going away and they shouldn't go away.
Right.
But there are a lot of things that are just like, amoral, not,
right.
necessary things that like we should be looking at. But I think a big one too is a big area that's probably ripe is like we need to get the message out. We need to be educating, helping people along their discipleship journey.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's something we talk about a lot at Subsplash. What is a discipleship journey? And I know it's something that churches are familiar with too. Like how do we move someone along? What's the next step? And I firmly believe, and I know we even do as a company, like that one of the greatest things and one of the most impactful things that moves anybody along in that journey is when they get in God's word and start reading on a regular basis. I mean, I know from my own life when I like sat down and like, I'm going to read this whole thing. Like, and most people don't even want to admit, but like I'm in my 20s and I'm like, I don't think I've ever read this whole Bible. I should do that. I should read it just to make sure there's nothing in there that like I totally disagree with or anything like that. And so, I love like the Bible Project and different people that are out there like trying to find different ways to get the right content out, but do it in a new way and do it in ways that with AI and so many things that we can do. I believe there's ways to help people like find, oh, you're studying this. Yeah. Well, here's some great content for you, or here's some and start recommending things and start. I think that's going to be crucial to kind of take the message, take what we're doing, take all the lessons we've learned, and how do we get it out there in a way that all those people that aren't going to step foot in front of inside of a church can have access to it and start to dig into it and start to, experience things and then get them connected to a body. But that just might not be their first step anymore.
Yeah, I love it. And even just the practice, I mean, it's like thinking about what's sacred, what's not. What are those areas that we are deconstructing, and what are things that are timeless and they just, hold true throughout, every generation of believer. Now, along the lines of innovators, who are innovators that you look up to?
So there, definitely, I think there's some like go-to answers that people talk about. And I know that people like Steve Jobs, for instance, and people talk about like what he did with Apple, but like it really, in some ways he can maybe get too much credit, like, oh, he created the smartphone.
Sure,
you know,
yeah.
and because the reality is smartphones existed way before that, but it was just like the technological elite that used them, right? You know, like, oh my gosh, what is that guy using? It's got like a fold-out keyboard and a stylus, and like, what's that guy doing? But his passion was not, it wasn't like creating all of these things. It was like, okay, but we have to make it simpler. We have to make it simpler, and we have to make it clean, and we have to make it beautiful, because people like using beautiful things. They don't like using clunky, you know, like, yes, it performs these functions, but, you know, and so that, I love what he did and his passion for. Everybody should be able to use this, and, you know, we got to make it simple. We got to make it beautiful on that. But, you know, there's, you know, in the church space, you know, I honestly, like, I am a huge fan of like John Piper and what he's done with Desiring God. And it might, you know, the Desiring God, their website that he is, you know, and that organization has basically taken like every sermon that he's done since, I don't know, the 1980s or whatever, and categorized it and made it searchable and all these things, like, and it's just like no one had really ever done that before. And even like he has a series called Look at the Book, which is like where he goes on and like, you know, uses a stylus and is like describing scripture, but like drawing on screen and doing all these things. And I don't know, just I love the fact that he's a great example, I think, though, of like his message is sound, his doctrine is sound, and he's not doing anything that's like, oh, we're gonna throw out this and this and over there. It's just like, no, how do we get this message out to the right generation and get in the hands of people and use technology like people have always been using it? I mean, the Roman roads, you know, all different things that have kind of helped that along. And
I love how this too, it's not that any of these live in a vacuum, that we just, it's one inspires another, which then inspires another that you build off, and then things, I mean, even thinking about the iPhone, or like what you're talking about in terms of searchable content, that things that then become so normative for us that we kind of forgot that somewhere along the way someone figured out that there was a change, or that some innovation had to happen
until you have kids and like they're like, what is that thing on the wall that they're having with the cord? Like, oh, that's what a phone used to look like.
Yeah, that it becomes so normative that it's like, well, of course this is how it always probably should have been, the obvious. So really, as we wrap it up, I mean, one last question for you, which kind of ties in, is, you know, what's it look like if we fail to innovate?
Yeah. So we as a church.
Yeah, and maybe we zero it in for just the church space.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I think about it this way. I think that we do have being image bearers of God. Yeah. Okay. He created us and he put us in a garden, and he told us to go cultivate it, go and do stuff. And I think there is a mandate as Christians to constantly. So I'm also like a huge C.S. Lewis fan. Okay, so my church. They make fun of me because I got like a one quote, quota for C.S. Lewis. But anyways, at the end of his books in the Chronologicals of Narnia, there's this part where they're all, essentially in heaven, but like they're all running towards. Sorry, spoiler alert if you're like going through the Chronicles of Narnia right now.
Earmuffs right now.
But they have this phrase that they keep saying, and it's like further up and further in. It's like go further, go deeper, go find out more, because our God is so infinite. There's always more to discover. There's always more. And I do believe like he's called us, just like when he called us and put us in the garden, like he's like, go after it. Yeah. Go after me, find more of me, and that's why I think science and everything lines up so much with what Christians are called to do, is to try to just continually use the brains that God gave us. We're to love them with all our mind. That's a part of it. Like, we're supposed to be using our brains, looking at the world, looking at pains people are having, looking at problems, and we have to not be scared to innovate. We have to not be scared to step out, try something new, even if you get a little flack for it or something, or even if you're going to fail. Like, I think it was Edison that says, like, I didn't fail 1,000 times. I just found 1,000 ways not to create a light bulb.
Yeah, I love that.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's what we have to constantly be doing. And if we don't do it, okay, the sad part is if we don't do it, what we don't want is the church to become Blockbuster.
Yeah.
Right? We don't want the church to become something that...
What's Blockbuster?
That's right. Yeah.
For those that don't know, Blockbuster was this place where you went to rent a hard copy of a DVD or VHS
now,
tape.
Now explain
actually.
what a DVD is. Yes. No.
We can keep going back on this. Yeah. But obviously, even just connecting the dots, video streaming where we are today completely took out the Blockbuster franchise, which model was around physical hard copy movies.
Yep.
To
and
where,
so I think where we need to be is, I just think it's always important to not get caught up in, like, I think people also on the other side, like, what's the right way to do church?
Sure.
What's the wrong way to do church? And it's not really about that. And you get too much hung up on it. It's like, what are the times that we're living in? What is the culture that we're in? How do we take the things that are necessary and good and right and proper and that can't be sacrificed, like the good news, right? And we have to be looking for, how do we break down walls? How do we smash hurdles and barriers and things that don't need to belong there? Like, oh, there's a stigma about that. Like, well, great, we don't need it. Throw it out. Like, if that bothers you and that's a problem, like, but we have to be looking for new ways to do it. And I think that when we do that, I do think that's the way that we reflect our Creator. That He is someone that goes and smashes down barriers and walls to get the message to us. We saw what He did to get the message to us, and I think that's what we need to be doing. We need to be continually blazing trails and knocking down walls to get it out there.
Oh, I love that. And it's joining in that mystery of God's promise that He's with us, and that call to create, that there's a mystery in Him inhabiting us through the Holy Spirit and still giving us the freedom to go out, create, and participate with Him in new creation.
Yep.
And He's with us and He talks to us, and I mean it's a mystery. That's like the only word that I can think of in that. But well, thank you so much for joining us here, and you too for tuning in. We are just beginning this conversation, so stay tuned. If you haven't subscribed already, go ahead and do that. If you want to take a couple minutes to rate us in the store, it actually helps us become more visible. So we'd love if you took the time to do that. Share it with a friend. Also, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at podcast@subsplash.com. We'd love to hear questions that you have. We'd love to hear ideas about episodes you'd like to hear, and in general, just engage with you more as well. And as always, you can follow us at Subsplash. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to Equip and Engage, where we're sharing insights learned from thousands of conversations with leaders and pastors around the world. To follow along with these conversations, subscribe today or visit our website.